We're up to the Mishnah. We actually did the Mishnah. We're up to the Gemara, but let's quickly run through the Mishnah again. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Hayru Bezdin v'yadu sheto. So they paskened wrong, and then they found out that they made a mistake. V'chazru ben, and they were chayzer. Bein shaviu kaparosim u'bein shaloi hiviu kaparosim. Whether or not they already brought a korban, a parhal davashal tzibur. But and then after all this, one person didn't get the WhatsApp, and one person went and did the same avera based on the original faulty psak. Reb Shimon holds that still considered being totally in das bezdin, and therefore he's part from bringing his own personal korban. Rabbi Lezer Omer Suffolk, and Rashi tells us that Suffolk means he brings a nashim tov. Ezeu Suffolk, what would be considered a Suffolk? Yoshev loy b'sech beisoy chayiv. If he was sitting in his house, that we consider a Suffolk, and therefore he's chayiv to bring in nashim totally. But halach loy lemedina sayam potter. But if he went to the Medina Sayyam, meaning he's so far away, there's no way he could have possibly heard about the reversal, then he's potter. Rabbi Kiva, I agree to you. Shukarav l'ptor minachayva. If he's in Medina Sayyam, it's karav l'ptor, and therefore there's no clear isser here that it would warrant a noshim tali. Amal ben Azai. So Ben Azai asked him a question. What's the difference between someone who's traveling far away in Medina Sayyam and Yoshev B'Veisai? So Rabbi Kiva answered back, he could have heard about it. He could have asked around. He was there in the community. This is a very interesting conversation because Rabbi Lezer starts off by making that distinction between Yoshev Beisai and Halach Medina Sayyam. So why is he now questioning Rabbi Kiva on it? Right? Rabbi Kiva says, "I'm moided to you," and Rabbi Lezer says the same thing. And now there's an argument. So the Gemara is going to clarify what exactly is the argument over here. Zog to Gemara weiter. Zog to Mishnah weiter. Haru bezin lacher es kol haguf. What if they said there's no such thing as a complete mitzvah or complete avera? For instance, Amr Einida B'Torah, Ein Shabbos B'Torah, Ein Avodas Kechavim B'Torah. All these Hare Elu Pturin. There's no chiyuv for a par helam davar shel tzibur if they made such a bad mistake that they totally ignored a full mitzvah. But a Haru Levatal Mitzvah Levatal Miktas Lekayim Miktas. But if they acknowledge that there is such an isser, but there were certain halachas in that isser that they were falsely matir, there, hare elu chayavin, then in fact they would be chayiv. That is what a par helam davar shel tzibur is about. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter. Ketzat amru yesh nida b'Torah. We know there is an isra nida, of course. Aval abal shemeres yoim keneged yoim is potter. Now shemeres yoim keneged yoim is if a woman sees dam, not at the time where it could be a nida. In other words, in the time of her cycle, where it would not be a nida, the loch is she's a zava. But she's not a zava for 7 days, she's a zava for 1 day, and she has to be shemeres yoim keneged yoim. Keneged the yoim that she saw dam, the next day she has to be shemer a day of nikim. So she has to have 1 day of nikim. But the next day she's naki, she's ois zava. But during that period of time, she is a zava and she's osir. So that is the shayla. If a woman's in that period of time where she is a shemer shem keneged yoim, they mistakenly said that there's no isser to be with her, and that was their mistake. Now today, none of these are negea because everything we consider like a zava gedola. Or they said yesh Shabbos b'Torah aval amoiti mershus hayochid l'shus harabim potter. One prat they said is potter. Or yesh avodas kechavim b'Torah aval amishtachav potter. And all these examples, these are the textbook cases of par helam davar shel tzibur, harei lechayavin shenemar v'nelam davar. A detail would be forgotten by bezdin. Davar v'loy kolaguf. The Torah is specifically referring to a case where a detail of a mitzvah was forgotten, not the entire mitzvah. My time of Reb Shimon. What is this for Reb Shimon who holds that the person is potter because he's relying on bezdin because he didn't get the message? He is still doing it with the understanding that Bezdin was matter. Any hayra that was put out b'roiv tzibur, yachida isa potter. A yachid who doesn't will be potter. Levi shalei nitna hayra ela lahafkan bin shoyig lemesid. Rashi has two pshatim. The first pshat is a little bit difficult to understand. Rashi says the only reason why they paskin is that's how you should know if it's shoyig lemesid. If you, I'm sorry. How long is it welcome for?
They made a mistake.
Forever.
They brought
right.
Not anytime someone does this.
If it's still based on that knowledge that he had not yet been updated on. Yeah. So what does it mean? The first part Rashi says is, yeah, if you know something is osur, then and you do it, it's amazing. If not, it's a shoygig. But the reason why that pshat's not so gishmak is because this is a case of shoygig where you're going to be potter, not chayiv. A regular shoygig you can bring a chattas for. So Rashi's second pshat is if he thinks it's mutter, then he does it b'mezid. He's doing it knowingly, but he's not going to have to bring a carbon because he was told that's bezdin. But if there's no ira, then someone who's doing an aver is doing it b'shogig, and he is chayiv a carbon. Meisvei par helam dover shel tzibur v'seirei avodas kechav. Who pays for them? Betchila goyven aleihim. Divrei Rab Shimon. They have to make a special collection to raise money for the Param Dov Shel Tzibur. The Iboy Yisema, I'm Reb Shimon. Reb Yudaimer mitrumas halish came by. It comes from the regular pot of the shkolim that pays for all the kabbalas. But Frank the Gemara, Reb Shimon said that this fellow was unaware of the fact that Bezdin reversed. How could he be unaware? They came to him for money to pay for the Param Dov Shel Tzibur. Amai, even the Gavilahu Haver Lehaida. Obviously, if he's giving money, he's asking, what are you collecting money for? You're collecting money for a pile of tzibur, so he would have known. So how is it possible that someone should not be aware of a reversal? Yeah, they know, they went over to each individual. They told him, we need for the tzarech and beis hamikdash, but they didn't tell him precisely what it was for. He was in the middle of Krishna. He said, no, I'm busy now. So they didn't ask him. Or just changed the shittas around. Rav Kidach Tama Sofer, the Tanya Ipcha. Betchila Goyven Lahem Div Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda who said they made a special collection. Rabbi Shimon Mitrumas Alishka and Bayin, and therefore no one would even know that they're doing this unless they are very aware of what's going on. Tanya Reb Meir Mechayev. So now we have the a new shita that was not presented in our Mishnah. Reb Shimon Poiter and Reb Elazar Aimer Suffolk, which we said already means you bring an Asham Talui. Mishum Sumchas Amar Talui, meaning you don't bring any carbon at all. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Asham Talui Ike Beinai. The nafkamina between Sumchas is a Talui and Reb Elazar said Suffolk is whether or not you bring an Asham Talui. Reb Elazar holds you bring an Asham Talui, and Sumchas holds you don't. And the Gemara is now going to illustrate the nuanced difference between Reb Elazar and Sumchas. Reb Elazar holds there's an actual Suffolk Isra here, which warrants an Asham Talui, and Sumchas holds there's no actual Suffolk Isra here. And let's see how this works out. Amar Abzer Moshel de Reb Elazar Lamad Avatayma LaAdam Sha'achal Suffolk Chaylev Suffolk Shuman. Someone ate a piece of meat that we're not sure now if it's chaylev or shuman. And he knew that he ate a piece of meat, and he knew that the piece of meat that he ate could have been chaylev or could have been shuman. So there's a real option of isra here, and it's a suffix shemevi yashim. That's what you bring an ashim totally for. V'loy mi boy, it's pashit. Remember, we had a machlokes who's responsible to bring the par helam davar shel tzibur. Is it the tzibur or is it the bezin? So the milsa. If the tzibur is bringing it, then it will be known that the tzibur is bringing the carbon. So it's more likely that he should have found out about it. That's why we have like a real tzad isher here. Even if the carbon is brought by Bezdin, so maybe it wouldn't be as talked about because it's a private Bezdin issue, and he wouldn't have been busy with it. But he have a shol, have a armorlay. Had he asked, I heard Bezdin's bringing the carbon, what precisely is Bezdin bringing the carbon about? And then he would have found out exactly what happened if there was a reversal. But so even in such a case, we would say that there's a real potential liability, and that's why Rabbi Lazar said you're bringing us from Tali. How does Sumchus view this situation? He considers it something very different. If someone brought a carbon, now we know you're not supposed to bring a carbon after the Talmud Shel Bein Harbayim. Bein HaShemoshes is a time that Rashi defines as a flash, the moment that it interchanges from day to night. We have Shita souls that Bein HaShemoshes lasts for a long period of time. But Rashi is working with the Shita that Bein HaShemoshes is Keheref Ayin, and someone brought a carbon right during Bein HaShemoshes. Sofik mi bojoim nischaper loy, sofik mi shechashecha nischaper loy. We don't know when exactly it happened, but regardless if it's considered night, whether Bein HaShemoshes is considered night, and the suffix is not, was it before Bein HaShemoshes or if it was after, it was exactly Bein HaShemoshes. Bein HaShemoshes exactly is a suffix if it's day, it's a suffix if it's night. She'ain maybe Asham Tali. There you don't even bring an Asham Tali. Why? Because nobody can answer that question. Nobody can tell us whether or not Bein HaShemoshes is day or night. So no one can tell me for sure that there was Isser over here. It's pashut. If Bezin brings it, there's really no place to be mechayiv this guy for any Isser. And maybe there is some liability. They would have told him in a case of a Bein HaShemoshes case, where someone asks, was it day or night? There is nobody who could answer that question because it's a suffix if Bein HaShemoshes is Yom or Bein HaShemoshes is Laila. It's a question that's no one's able to answer. So too over here, nobody can ever point to the fact that he should have known. So Rashi, nobody would ask. This person didn't think to ask. Lama he viewed tzibur par. Why did the tzibur bring a par? A person doesn't have to think that way. There's no really serious tzad chiv. The tzad patur shayich beitvei. There's a much better tzad to pater. It's not an even suffix. The toilet bebezdin, because he relies on bezdin when he's doing the isser because he thinks that they were matter. Talk to Gemara weiter. Omer loy ben Azai. So we had an unusual conversation between Ben Azai and Rabbi Kiva. They seem to, the Shaklataya looks like they're arguing, but they seem to be saying exactly the same thing. So Zog to Gemara, Shaper Ka'omer lei, Rabbi Kiva, Liven Azai. Rabbi Kiva's final svara that he said that someone sitting at home might have been able to find out, but somebody that was traveling far away, there's no way he could have found out. So, like, what made Ben Azai uncomfortable about that? That's Rabbi Kiva was reiterating that. Amarava, in fact, there's a point of contention there, and that is if it's hichsik b'derech ikvenai. What if he's still there? He's still there. He didn't leave his home yet, but he is about to leave for a trip. So he's very thorough in planning his trip. Ben Azai chayiv. According to Ben Azai, he holds it would be chayiv. The habevei he's in his house, and if he's in his house, he should have been able to be aware, and therefore he's mechayiv him and Hashem told him. Rabbi Kiva Potter, according to Rabbi Kiva, it's not totally in where he is, rather it's totally in his mindset, and his mindset would be mevulvul once he's planning to leave.
Home, but he's still within the city.
That's what Rashi says?
You leave your place.
I mean, so
your wife has 100 stops to make it.
Oh, so he start. You're right. That's what Rashi says. It's not the article Rashi says. So I misunderstood that as saying he's planning to go, but he didn't go. But Rashi Taka says he left. He left his house, but he's still on the QEW. So until you get to the border, it could take 3 hours in good traffic. So that's called leaving. That's called that. I would say that doubles down on the frustration. Rabbi Kiva Potter, the hahichzik b'derech. L'maisa, he started already. The kivin the Torah who lo haya afshul lo shishma the chazar. He's busy looking. Should I have taken the 407? Should I have taken the 407? Oh, it's the traffic. Where can I get off? Hilchach toilet bebezan hu upater legami. Therefore, he will be patering us. Zok more weiter. Tonu rabban. V'nelam dovar. It says v'nelam dovar. Let's look at the pasuk. In kol adas Yisrael yeshku. All of Klaishol does a shagig. V'nelam dovar me'enei akol. And the Bezdin didn't know something. Remember, we dashed akol also, and the tzibur did achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem asher lo yisrael said. So zok the Brisa v'lo sheyei aker hamitzvah kul. Dafka if a davar was nekar, but not if the entire mitzvah was uprooted. Ketzad amur einida b'Torah and Shabbos b'Torah and Avodah b'Torah yachol yuchayav, and I would have thought that you're chayiv a par held of shel tibor tamadov v'nelam davar v'lo shetis ale mitzvah kula. And therefore, Harei Elu Ptura in these cases would not bring a parhelim davar. Aval Amru Yeshnidi b'Torah. Aval Abal Shemei Shem K'neged Potter. Yesh Shabbos b'Torah. Aval Amoitzi Mishus Hayachid Lushus Harabim Potter. Yesh Avodas Gechavim b'Torah. Aval Hamishtachem b'Potter. Yachol you Ptura. You might think that's Potter. Tamad Loymar v'Nelam davar v'Loi Kolagov. Amar right away, just the way the Brisa reads it makes no sense. What do you mean Yachol you Ptura? We've established that if they forgot the whole mitzvah, you're potter. Now the Gemara, the Bryce is suggesting that if you forgot part of the mitzvah, you're potter. The ibikiyah mitzvahs ubital mixas pturin and uvakiris kolaguf pturin b'maychayavan. So what exactly is the situation where the Torah would be mechayiv apayom levershal tzibur? Once you've already excluded forgetting the whole mitzvah from parayom levershal tzibur, so then by process of elimination, it has to be miktas. Why do we need a pasuk for miktas? The Tana is turning the whole thing over on its head. Ema, in the second half of the Brisa, where the Brisa asks, maybe if he forgot half, he shouldn't bring a carbon hell tzibur. Maybe he was trying to say, Ema davar kula milsa, davar kula milsa mashma. When it says v'nelam davar, maybe it only means if you forgot the whole mitzvah. So in the second half of the Brisa, what the Brisa is asking, maybe it's pun fakert. When is there a chiyuv parhelim davar? That's only if they forgot the whole mitzvah. But if they forgot a detail in the mitzvah, then there wouldn't be. Tamad loymer v'nelam davar. My mashma. How do you see from the word v'nelam davar? He forgot something. Who said that means you forgot part of the mitzvah? Amar ula kari bei v'nelam midavar. Take the mem at the end of the word v'nelam and connect it to the next word v'nelam midavar. He forgot something. Doesn't forgot something from the thing. The detail from the main mitzvah. Chizkiya Amar, here's a different pasuk. Amar Kra, v'asu achas mikol mitzvahs. So it's mikol mitzvahs, from the mitzvahs, but v'lo kol mitzvahs. But he didn't forget the whole mitzvah. Correct, Gemara, mitzvah is tarti mashma. If it says mikol mitzvah, so then it's part of a mitzvah. Mikol mitzvahs means one complete mitzvah out of many mitzvahs. So what is your deal? Amar Nachman Yitzchak, mitzvah is ksiv. The word mikol mitzvah is spelled with one vav, not with two vav. When it's spelled with one vav, that means it's referring to one mitzvah. So therefore, mikol mitzvah means a part of one mitzvah. Rabashi Amar Yalef Davar Davar Mizakid Mamre. Let's look at what Davar means in the parish of Zakid Mamre. Tichsiv b'Zakid Mamre ki yipalim imcha Davar, and then the pasuk says weiter lo yisosel min hadavar asher yigidu lechayav and usmoil. This was last week's parsha. Ma Mamre. Mina davar v'loy chal davar, af b'hira davar v'loy chalagov. Just like by Zak and Mamre, if he denies the entire mitzvah, that would not make him into a Zak and Mamre. Only if he denied part of the mitzvah. So too with a par helam davar shel tzibur. Zak Rashi ma Zak and Mamre v'loy chal davar the haksiv min hadavar. So there it's much more clearly. It says, it doesn't say v'nelam davar, it says min hadavar. Utanan be'elam ha'inin nachnakin ha'omer ain't tefillin. Lavar al divrei Torah potter. If what the Zakan Mamre said, there's no such thing as the mitzvah of tefillin, that wouldn't make him into a Zakan Mamre. But if he said chamesh taitafais lahaysev al divrei seifim, but if he said the mitzvah of tefillin is 5 boxes, not 4, then he would be chayiv. Tainu min hadavar v'loy kol davar. So that's we would learn from Zakid Mamre to Par Helam Davar Shal Tzibur. Amar Bidom Shmuel. Ein Bezin Chayavin at Sheyayu B'Davar She'ein HaTzadukim Moedim B'Ay. The psak of Bezin has to be about an issue that is somewhat controversial. If it's clear cut, then we don't even consider the Bezin's original mistake as a legitimate psak, and it wouldn't be mechayiv a paral b'shal tzibur. It's only a legitimate psak if there is some controversy about it. For instance, the tzedukkim hold that this is not mechuyev, and Bezin sided with the tzedukkim. That's where you bring up paral b'shal tzibur. But if even the tzedukkim agreed that this is the halacha Turin, there would not be a chiyuv paral davar. My time, because zil kari beirafu. Any little child knows this halacha. So if any little child knows this halacha, that's not even considered a legitimate psak. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. I'm sorry. Even the tzedukkim agreed that this is the halacha. That means it's so pashut that that's halacha that if Bezin mistakenly passed against it, that's not even legitimate. Tanan. So let's look at our Mishnah and see what issues the Mishnah details that will warrant a paral b'shal tzibur. Tanan yesh nida b'torah aval haba al shemeres yom keneged yom pater. Correct Gemara, the tzedukkim are moeded to that. V'amai shemeres yom keneged yom haksiv. It says v'sofer lo melamed sheseferes echad leechad. So you're telling me if it's something that even the tzedukkim are moeded ba, there's no paral davar. But your example of shemeres yom keneged yom is exactly something that they're moeded to. So why is that something that you would bring a paral b'shal tzibur? So Gemara, they didn't say that you're allowed to be with a Shemer Hashem Keneged Yom. That's not what they said. What they said was the Ami Hara Shari. They said that a Tchilas Bia, if he only inserts the Aver, but he doesn't go in all the way, that's what's mutter. And the Isser of Shemer Hashem Keneged Yom is only if it's a Gemar Bia. So the Ami Hara Shari, it's Gemar Bia Hu Dasira. Freit the Gemara, that's also Karabei Rav. That also the tzedakим would be moided to, because anamik siv es mekayra hera. It says beferish by the nida that the isser is for making hara. So that's muforish in the Torah. The tzedakim would be moided. So how could this be something that the Mishnah lists off as something you bring a par hel davar tzibur for? The amri kedarka asira shaloi kedarka shari. Maybe what they said that a bia kedarka is what the Torah answers on a nida, but not a bia shaloi kedarka. For the Gemara, you can't say that either. Haksiv mishkevei isha. So it's also a mafurish apostle. And therefore, once again, what controversial issue is there in regards to Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom? Zok the Gemara, the Amri kedarka aser afilu b'hara b'shaloi kedarka gemar bihu the aser aval hara shari. Their mistake is that they said that hara is only aser by a bia kedarka. But by a bia shaloi kedarka, the issue won't be violated unless it's a gemar bia. Frek to Gemara, so then this has nothing to do with Shemer Hashem Keneged Yom. They said neither is also Shemer Hashem Keneged Yom is not. That's not what this is about. Yachi afilu nida nami. It has nothing to do with Shemer Hashem Keneged Yom. It's even by a nida. They wanted to say that by a bia shaloi kedarka, hara would not be violating the Isser. Ella, let's go back to the Dran. Ella kedarka. We're talking about a bia kedarka. Uda army, you know what they said? Hara be'isha davahu deksiva. You know where it says es mekayra hera? That's where it's speaking about a nida. It's not speaking about a zava, not a zava tana or a shemer Hashem keneged yom, not a zava gedoyla. So therefore, the Gemara says when they mistakenly thought that where does a hara violate? That's if it's a isha nida. But if it's a isha zava, their hara doesn't violate. That was their mistake, and that's not mafurish. And therefore, it could trigger a parham dover. You know what the mistake was? The army zava lehavia elabiyamami. They thought there's a still machlokes for showing them what this is, but Rashi learns that a zava is not also to have relations with only by day, not by night. Tichsiv kol yemei zava, all the days of Reziva. So they mistakenly paskin that there's no isser to be with a zava by night. So all of these examples are examples of things that are not mufurish. Tzedukkim could have argued, and therefore they bring a carbon. Now let's look at the next example the Mishnah gave. Tanan yesh Shabbos b'Torah, aval hamoitzi meshus l'shus is potter. Now, if you look at our Mishnah doesn't say aval hamoitzi meshus l'shus potter. You know what our Mishnah says? Aval Moitze Rishus HaYochid L'Shus HaRabim Potter. So there's a little bit of a difference in Gersa, which will have a huge impact in a very brief moment. Frank Gemor V'Amai Hayitzah Haksiva. It's also a portion of the Torah the Israel Tzah. It says Lo Yisaitziu Masa Mibateichem. And for the Gemara, the Amri Hayitzah Hu the Aser Hachnasa is mutter. Why is this a problem? Because our Mishnah says they said it's a mutter to be moitzi from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. You can't say that means Hachnasa. That's Hayitzah only. So Tosfos asked this kasha, and Tosfos could be our Tam is referring to Hachnasa with a Lashon Hayitzah, which is a little doichin. But Tosfos says, but Rabbi Kiveger says that's why a line earlier the Gemara quotes the Mishnah as saying Aval HaMoitzim Rishus L'Shus Potter. Zok Rabbi Kiveger, I think that's the right girsa in the Mishnah, and therefore Moitzim Rishus L'Shus could either be bringing it from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, which is Hayitzah, but it could also mean taking it out of Rishus HaRabim and bringing it into Rishus HaYachid, which is Hachnos. B'boy Sema, the Amri Hayitzah Hu da Asira. Yes, physically making an Akira and a Nacha, carrying something out or in will be also. But Moishit v'zoyrik shari. What if you throw something from one Rishus to another? What if you're standing in one Rishus and you lift up something in your Rishus and you put it outside and you put it there? Like in the first Mishnah in Shabbos, where you're not actually lifting something up, walking to the next Rishus and putting it back down. That's what they made a mistake about. So that's why it's not Meforish. What about the third example? Tanan Yeshav Tzchav B'Torah Aval Mishlach B'Potter. V'amai HaMishtachava Haksiva. It's Meforish in the Torah that Hashtachavoya is Aser. The Chsev Lo Hashtachava Elacher. The mistake Bezin made was the Amri Ki Asira Hashtachavoya B'Kedarka. If it's the normal way to serve this particular getchka, then Hashtachavaya works. But if this getchka is normally not served with Hashtachavaya, how do I know that Hashtachavaya is a universal avoida that's also by every type of getchka? That's the mistake that they made. Do you know what type of Hashtachavaya is usher? Only if you're totally lying flat on your face. Hashtachavaya, the less by Pisha Yudayim Verglayim, if you're just bending over or in your hands and knees, sorry, that would be mutter. And that was the mistake that they made. And really, any type of Hashtachavaya is prohibited. Zok Tehelik Gemara Vayter, Boy Rabbi Yosef. Ein Charisha B'Shabbos. What if Bezdin said there's no such thing as an Isser to plow on Shabbos? Mao, is that Dover? Called over, so we're not going immediately back to the discussion we had with the simple thing that the Tzedakah are masking on. We're going back to the discussion before, is that if they totally eliminated a complete mitzvah, that's not something they bring a carbon for. So what about Charisha? They agreed to all the other issues of Shabbos, Bishul, and all the other malachas. So therefore, kabital mixes the kia mixes domi. Oidilma keeping the karyan lecharisha kol ikar, since they're completely denying a complete iser with all of its details, kakiris gufta. That's kakiris guf, and therefore you would not bring a parallel number for it. Zok Gemara Tashima. Yesh nida b'Torah. Our Mishnah again. Aval abal shemer shoyim keneged yoyim is potter. Frank the more v'amai. So that's just like Harisha. There's this type of Isser, but the whole category of Shemer Hashem Keneged Yoim, you're wiping out. Zok to Gemara, Amalach Rabbi Yosef, you weren't listening. Shemer Hashem Kida Kamrin. The Kamrin Kidashonin. Shemer Hashem, the Mishnah talking about is not that they totally wiped the Shemer Hashem. We already said it can't be that, because that's Zil Karbe Rafu. We said it means if it would be Kedak or Hara, whatever the different, or Bayim, the different nuances that they missed them. Tashma, Yeshavas B'Torah, Aval Amoichim Mishus HaYochid, Mishus HaRabim Potter, Hamai, HaKaryon Loitzah Kalikar. The same thing. Hasamnami Kiddushanin, what did we answer? We answered maybe it's referring to Zoyrek or Moishit, or maybe Tachnasa. Tashma, Yeshavas B'Torah, Aval Mishtach Potter, Hamai, HaKaryon Lishtachavay Kalikar. Dr. Gemara, the same thing we said a moment ago. Either they thought that if you don't do Pishat Yudayim Verglayim, that was their mistake, or if it was like a Darka, but whatever the case is, these are not examples of totally uprooting one Inyan. So at the end of the day, the Gemara does not push the Shiloh. If they said there's no such Isra as Charisha, is that called Miktas because it's Miktas of Shabbos, or is that a complete Parsha that they're excluding, and therefore they wouldn't bring a korban? Boy Rab Zeir, Ein Shabbos b'Shvius. What if they said that there's no mitzvah to be Shomer Shabbos in the Shemitah year? Ma, what would be the law? But my toe, what mistake would Bezdin have made that would have caused them to say that there's no mitzvah of Shabbos dafka during the Shemitah year? It says in the Torah about Shabbos, becharish uvakotzer tishbos. You must stop doing the work in the field. Bisman the ika charisha ika Shabbos. At a time where in the choil you're going to do charisha, that's where the Torah tells you need to keep Shabbos. Ubisman the leka charisha, but in a year of Shemitah, where anyway Charisha is prohibited even in the weekday, maybe like a Shabbos. That was the mistake that they made. So would that be considered totally uprooting Shabbos or not? Since they're saying Shabbos exists in other years of the Shemitah cycle, since they're totally uprooting the entire mitzvah of Shabbos for the Shemitah year, so basically, the Gemara Shaila is if it's time related, if you're limiting it to a specific time, would that be considered an akira completely? Because during that time it wasn't an akira completely. Amar bin Tashma, Novi shenisnabe. We're talking about a novi sheker. So novi shenisnabe lakar davar midiver Torah chayiv. You know when a novi is chayiv for being a novi sheker, that's if he says there's no such thing as Shabbos. He has to totally uproot a mitzvah. But levitel mitzvahs ulakia mitzvahs, if it was only half and half, then we have a machlokes. Rab Shimon Omer Potter. Actually, Rashi says it's not a machlokes. Everybody agrees that it's Potter, but Rab Shimon is the one quoted. Rab Shimon Omer Potter. However, Zok Rab Shimon by avodah zara, it's more chamer. Uvavodas kachavim afilu omer hayoim oivda ulamacher batla chayiv. So you see clearly from the brisa that hayoim oivda ulamacher batla is considered bitl mitzvahs and kiyam mitzvahs. Shemamina, Ein Shabbos b'Shvius is kivitel miktas v'kiyam mitzvahs dam Shemamina, because when it came to Hilchos Avodah Zarah, the brisa characterized saying Avodah Zarah applies on one day and not on another day. The brisa characterizes that as a bitl miktas and kiyam mitzvahs. Zok the Gemara weiter. Hayru Bezdin paskin v'yoda echad mehen shato, and one member of the Bezdin knew that they were making a mistake. We had this Mishnah quoted a couple of days ago. He protested in the Bezdin, you're making a mistake. I don't know if you remember, the Gemara said even there it's speaking Shehirchem B'Roshai. Even though he said Toinatam, it was Hirchem B'Roshai, and that's not a stira. Hirchem B'Roshai means even though I think you're wrong, but I'm going to follow the psak of the Roy. That's how our Gemara 2 days ago explained this Mishnah. Or the mufla of Bezdin wasn't there. There was always an elderly zaken that was always supervising the Bezdin, and he wasn't there when Bezdin paskin. Or if someone was either a ger, mamzer in the sin, or a zaken that couldn't have children, hareza potter, that's a faulty Bezdin, it's potter. So ger, mamzer in the sin, okay, it's not from our yichus. But what about zaken shein roy levonim? Rashi says v'kashali mipnei ein roy loy. Just because someone can't have children, he shouldn't be roy loy. So the Kiveger speaks out that someone who never had children is not roy loy, because there's a concept of karachem al albonim. Someone who has children could look away from bad things. You look at your child, the person will be much more forgiving for bad things that his own child might have done. We need a dayan with that type of mercy and that type of approach. We want our dayanim to be bleeding heart liberals. That's what we want, because we want them to find schus for the people that they judge. So hareza potter, they're potter because it's not a good business. I'm sorry? Shenemar kan Eda. It says Eda in reference to V'nela me'ena Eda, and it says V'nemer lahalon Eda, and it says Eda later on. Let's have a look. V'nemer lahalon Eda is by the carbon. Is by the halacha of paskening on a life and death issue. V'shavtu Eda ben Amako ben Gad Adam v'tzilu Eda. So it says Alosh Eda there. Ma Eda Hamur Alon. Just like a bezin that passes on the chi of misa, you need it to be a full bezin of people who are roy leira. Af Edo Hamura Khan, you Kulon Ruin Laira, they all have to be Royal Laira, they have to be Kosher Dayanim. If you didn't have excuse me, a full quorum of Kosher Dayanim, the psak is not valid, and therefore it would not. I'm sorry.
Why is he on the bed? He's not fucking.
So Rashi suggests that they got on by mistake because people left, but Rashi talks about a little bit of a thing. Well, Rashi speaks about the mutla shamach lebesin. Even though they're not part of it, but he supervises. The other people, I don't know. You're right. Rashi does not say. I take it back. Rashi does not say how they got on the best. Maybe people didn't know. I don't know. And I assume they checked the guy out. That's a good question. How that happened, I don't know the answer. If you ask 50% of anyone who petitions best and holds the die into Mamser, the guy who loses. So I'm not sure how you do that. So to Gemara. Oy shaloi hoya mufla shal bezin sham. Who said the mufla of bezin is not even from the count of the dayanim? He's just like a supervisor. Who said that you can't pass him without him? If they ma'amru hayu b'davar shetzadukim moedim by Turin, why did they say hayu b'davar shetzadukim moedim by Turin? It's because such an obvious stupid mistake, your psak doesn't even get labeled as a psak. There's a psaknish. You didn't do your basic due diligence. Well, guess what? It's exactly the same thing. Nami Pturin, don't pass it on a serious issue without having the mufla shal bezin there. So it's the same grubba mistake. You have no business passing if the mufla is there, not there, and therefore we don't give your psak validity. Nemer sham eda by passing on dini nefashos, the nemer kan eda achi kulan ruin leira. How do you know that by the bezdin who's passing on dini nefashos? How do you know that they have to have a bezdin of kulam ruin leira? We had this in Sanhedrin. It says v'siatzu shamimach. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe to be mamana the shivim zakenim, what does it say? V'yom Moshe esveli shivim ish mizikna Yisrael asher yodata ki im zikna yam v'shoyjov v'lakachda oisam eloyel moed v'tziasu sham imach. They should stand with you. What does imach mean with you? Imach b'daymilach. They have to have all your features. You're not a mamzer, you're not in the sin, you're not a ger, right? You have children. All of the milas, all of the features that a dain has to have, they have to have, because they have to be imach, have to be with you. Frankly, who said that's what the pasuk means by imach? The imach l'shchina. Maybe imach means they should stand with you and not go into the mishkan, stay away from the shchina. Or Rashi has another shot. They have to be people who have kedusha, who are royal to have a shor shchina. But who's that talking about the features that a dain has to have to be a kosher dain? With another pasuk that where Yisroi told Moshe, when he told him how to build a bezin and how to build a bureaucracy in the bezin, and he said, "V'nosu itach," they will carry the load with you. There it means itach b'daimilach. There clearly it's talking about for paskening, not for other inyanim, that the dain has to be like Moshe Rabbeinu.
There's a difference between Yisro's between what Yisro suggested and what Sanhedrin is. Yisro says you have to take like 1 out of 1,000. Right. But a Sanhedrin is 70, right? And a few from each Shevet.
Yeah, but maybe they still have to have those features.
Yeah.
Said all of the Dayanim, even the Saris, have to have the same qualifications as Moshe.
Right, but which one?
Sounds like they were a dime a dozen.
What?
Sorry. Sounds like they were a dime a dozen.
Yeah, there were thousands of them.
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to the 70.
Yeah.
Or 72.
But they still had to have children. They all had to have. They couldn't be gerim. They couldn't be mamzerim. They couldn't be nesinim. Haru Bezdin Shoygin. Bezdin Paskin by mistake. That's exactly the discussion where you have a Param Doshal Tibor. But also Kalakal Shoygin. And they also followed blissfully. Mevi'in Par, that's when you bring the Par. But Mezidin, what if Bezdin are Roshoyim and they paskined wrong on purpose? But also Shoygin, but Klal Yisrael was innocent. They followed the falsified psak of the bezin, then there's no power helam davar for that. Therefore, mavin kaspo sira. Every person has to bring a carbon for their chay. What about shagi and vasu mazidin? What if bezdin paskin in good faith, but vasu mazidin, but Klal Yisrael knew that it was also and they did it anyway? Hare elu pturin. Again, there is no power helam davar shel tzibur. Now they don't bring a individual chatas either because they did it amazing. You don't bring a chatas for amazing. Zoktikamor shagin vasu mazidin. Hare elu pturin. If it was mezidin, then they're potter. Hashogig dumi demezid. But what if Bezdin was shogig and Klal Yisrael did it not mamish mezid, but they did it shogig karvel mezid? Chayiv, that would be mechayiv a pile of doshal. What am I driving at? What's the shogig karvel mezid? The heichadami sheharu Bezdin shechelav mutter v'nischalaf loy v'shumen v'achla. We had a discussion about this. What happens if Bezdin paskin that this chaylev is mutter, and then someone thought this was shumin, and it turned out being that chaylev? So he would have done it anyway because Bezdin paskin that he could do it. We had a shayla about that if there's a parhel davar shel tzibur. So the Gemara wants to say that equates to a shoyig dumi demezid, and we're being medayik from our Mishnah that in such a case, you would bring a carbon. So frankly, Gemara tiv sheitad the boy Rami bar Chama. Now we can be pushed the shayla that we had on the first day from Rami bar Chama. Amalach mishum the Tana reisha mazidin v'asu shogig. I'm sorry, Amalach, you don't have a raya. Don't make that deal because really huadin shogig dumi demezid would also be potter. The reason why the Mishnah uses a lashon of v'asu mazidin and not shogig karvel mazid is the Mishnah is just trying to stay parallel. Mishum the Tana reisha mazidin v'asu shogig Tana say v'shogig v'asu mazidin. But huadin, it could be if a shogig that's karvel mazid would have the same halacha. Zok to Gemara Vayter. Haru Bezdin v'asu kol akol or ruban al piyeh. Bezdin paskin and then roiv or all the kol. That's the textbook case of param nafshel tiber meviin par. But if the avera was avodah zara, then the Torah says you bring a par and a seir divrei bear, because that is what the Torah says. There's two karbanos that have to be brought if the Eden did avodah zara by mistake. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yud Beis Shvatim meviin Yud Beis Parim. With the param davar shel tzibur is shevet by shevet, and therefore every shevet would have to bring a par. Uvavoyz kechavim meviin Yud Beis Parim ushnei amasur sirim, and by avodah zara again it's per shevet. Okay, there's a long Mishnah, but I just have to get to the end of the daf, which we got to. So Mishnah will start the Mishnah tomorrow. I'm very excited because it's like the first time since we started Horios that we actually finished the daf.